Hello dear students, a very warm welcome to another session for AIATS Plus Phase 2, where we discuss the questions in which most of you tend to make mistakes and the concepts around it. And I am Snehal, your zoology faculty at Aakash. So as the ritual continues, we have had our session for zoology, but there are still few topics left which I will be taking. And as usual, the topics that I will be taking from here onwards are biomolecules, excretory product and their elimination, locomotion and movement, human health and disease, and evolution. And by this time, I believe that I have mentioned this so many times that amongst all the given chapters, biomolecules holds the most importance. All right? So, let us begin the session without wasting much time. So, the first question that we have today in our bucket is question number 179. And it reads, in the section of a forest, there are more medium-sized plants than tall plants and dwarf plants. Over a period of time, it was observed that the number of dwarf and tall plants is twice as that of medium-sized plants. Seems like a long story, all right? But when I look at the question, I try to see it in a way that here we are talking about natural selection, all right? So, before coming to the options, let us quickly discuss the concept of natural selection. So, as the name suggests, natural selection, which means that nature is selecting something, all right? So, basically, the concept of natural selection was given by the renowned person that we all know, Darwin, all right? So, basically, what Darwin said was that nature tries to select for the variations which will help the individual to survive more in the given circumstances and most importantly leave more number of progenies. So basically here it is that we need to keep in mind that there are two important points. The first one is obviously the survival, but there should also be reproductive fitness attached to that individual, which means it's not only the survival that is important, the individual should be able to leave more number of progenies so that we can say that presence of that individual is an advantage, all right? So here we means survival as well as reproductive fitness. So this was all which was said by Darwin, and we all know that Darwin believed in variations. I can see students have joined. So a very warm good evening to everyone. I'm glad that you are here and you are participating, all right? So basically we talked that nature tries to select for the variations which are useful. And we also know that there is another concept which was given by Hugo de Vries, and he said that Hugo de Vries said that it is mutations which cause speciation. So basically there were differences in opinions about what brings about evolution in nature, but now we know that it is both variation, and mind you, it is important that it is the heritable variations which bring about evolution, and it is mutation as well, which will bring about evolution in nature. All right. So this was the basic concept of natural selection. Now, when nature is trying to select any particular trait, it will work in three manners. Now, what are those three manners? We'll see it quickly. So basically, when nature is trying to select, it works by selecting it in three ways, and they are stabilizing selection, then we have directional selection, and lastly we have the disruptive selection. So basically these words simply mean that the traits which are being selected in nature show a particular pattern, all right? And you can see on the screen there is a graph which is taken from the NCERT. So we'll quickly talk about these different types of selections, all right, so that we can solve our question. So the first category is the stabilizing selection. So when I talk about stabilizing selection, so dear students, what happens in stabilizing selection is that nature tries to select the trait which will be the mean value of other traits. To put it simply, let us consider an example where we have alleles for example, let's take the example of height, okay? So let's assume that we have an allele for tall T, tall plant, and it is T. Then we have another allele for short or dwarf plant, which is represented by small t, all right? So what nature will do when it is performing a stabilizing selection is that it will not favor any of the extreme traits. Instead, it will favor that in the given population all the plants will be medium sized, which means the mean value of both the traits are being favored. So basically the plants that we will have in the stabilizing selection will be of medium size, or we also say it that the nature is trying to select the traits which have mean value. And if we try to represent this type of selection on a distribution curve, then the peak that we will get will be somewhat like the graph which you can see on your screen. The first graph that we have here represents a stabilizing selection, and here we can see we have a higher and a narrower peak, representing that neither of the extreme characters are being favored. Instead, we have a mean value, all right? So even if in the question we have a graph like this and it is asking that what kind of natural selection does it represent, we should be able to identify it. That is why we are discussing the graphs as well, all right? And a very famous example of stabilizing selection that exists in nature is the sickle cell anemia. Individuals with sickle cell anemia which survive in the African regions. So basically what happens when we talk about sickle cell anemia in terms of stabilizing selection is that we all know that in sickle cell anemia, I can see someone has commented that Bikram is saying it acquires peripheral character, so answer would be disruptive selection. Okay, Bikram, I hope we reach to the answer, all right? So basically what happens in and thank you for your input. So basically what happens in sickle cell anemia is that individuals which show heterozygous condition, which means they have a recessive trait of a recessive allele of sickle cell anemia, they tend to survive more in regions where malaria is endemic. Okay, so basically when we talk about the life cycle of malaria or life cycle of plasmodium that causes malaria, what happens is a major portion of the life cycle is spent in the RBC of a man. Alright, so as we all know, in sickle cell anemia, our RBC will become sickle shaped. So what happens? The plasmodium is not able to survive in that distorted shape of RBCs. Alright, so the individual, even if infected by malaria, will not have this infection because the pathogen itself is not able to survive in that particular individual. Alright, so basically this sickle cell heterozygous condition is helping an individual to survive or to fight with that dangerous lethal malaria disease, and therefore what nature is doing? Nature is selecting this sickle cell heterozygotes when we talk of places which are badly infected by malaria. Alright, so here we are trying to say, and how we are trying to say that it is a stabilizing selection, because individuals which carry a homozygous condition for sickle cell, these individuals will die. This is a lethal condition. So what happens is that these homozygous will die in nature, but these heterozygotes will survive. The nature will select these heterozygotes. Also, it has been noted that heterozygotes of sickle cell, of individuals with sickle cell anemia and heterozygote condition tend to be more fertile, which means they can leave more number of progeny in the nature. So here we can see that there is a balance existing between the number of people which are dying and the number of people which are being favored in the nature. Alright, so we also term this type of selection as balancing selection. Alright. So we often find in our question papers, we might have examples that sickle cell anemia represent what kind of natural selection. So we should be able to answer now that it represents balancing selection in nature. Alright, so moving to our second category, which is the disruptive selection. So basically what happens is that in nature tries to select the traits which are the peripheral traits or the extreme traits. For instance, again, if we take the example of trees, where we have tall trees as well as the small size trees, then what nature will do? The nature will eliminate the medium sized trees and it will favor the selection of these tall as well as the short trees. So basically the kind of peak that we will get when we try to represent this natural selection on the distribution curve, then we will get two peaks for the two different given characters, because these two characters are totally different from each other, and we will see that the median character or the medium mean value of this character is getting eliminated in nature, and therefore we can see that in the graph that we get, we will have a depression here. So basically we get two peaks when we try to represent disruptive selection. Alright. So So now we move on to our next example, which is the directional selection. So what happens in directional selection is that nature will try to select any of the between two peripheral traits, nature will select any one trait, which means it will be either the tall plants or it will be the short plants. Okay, and when we will try to represent it on the distribution curve, then the kind of peak that we will get will be directed towards a particular direction. For instance, if I take an example that we get to read very often is the industrial melanism, where the nature favored the growth of black winged moths. All right. So if we try to draw a curve, a distribution curve for directional selection of industrial melanism, then we will have our peak shifted in one direction, and that will be towards the black winged moth. All right. So basically what nature is doing, the nature is trying to eliminate the other peripheral character. All right. So I hope it is making sense to you that there are three different types of natural selection that operates in nature. So now let us go back to our question to figure out the story which was given, and if we see the story again, we need to read the keywords which are given in the question. It is that there are more medium sized plants, which was the condition earlier, but now the number of dwarf and tall plants are twice now, which means what nature did, nature eliminated the individuals which had medium size, which were medium sized. So basically here, if you recall, if we try to draw the graph that we will get will be somewhat like this, where we will represent the dwarf plants at one side and the tall plants on the other side, and the kind of graph that we'll get will help us determine that we're talking about disruptive selection. And in the options given, I can see our first option itself states disruptive selection, therefore our right answer will be option 1, and we have already talked about balanced selections and the other two categories. All right. So now quickly move on to our next question. So the next question now I see is from the chapter Locomotion and Movement, and it is question number 137, and it states in humans the joint present between carpals is. So basically we are talking about joints. So we have already talked about joints in our previous videos. So joints are basically joints serve as the attachment points for bones, and it helps facilitate movement. And I remember I gave an example of the door that we use in our houses, where we have a hinge attached to one side of our door. So this joint is just like that door hinge. Means if you're trying to open the door, it will show movement because of that hinge. All right. And I can see someone has answered in the comment section. Bikram, you're absolutely right. It acts as a fulcrum. It is also stated in the NCERT that our joints act as fulcrum, and fulcrum basically means a point where rotation occurs. So again, imagine the example of the hinge that we have in our doors. That is the point about which the door rotates. All right. So now quickly, if we recall the types of joints which are present in our body are the cartilaginous joints, the fibrous joints, and the synovial joints. And there are basic differences between these three types of joints, and the first one is that they allow only a certain degree of movement. So the first difference that we have is on the basis of movement that these particular joints allow. Let me know in the comment section which one do you think will be the least movable, alright. So basically, amongst all, the joint which is the least movable is the fibrous joint, followed by we have cartilaginous joints which allow certain degree of movement, and then we have the synovial joint which allow maximum movement. It is movable, we can say. Alright. So this was one of the differences. Now the other difference between these different types of joint is the substance which attaches the bones. For instance, in cartilaginous joints, two bones will be attached to each other with the help of a cartilage. We also say that there are blocks of cartilage present between the two bones. And when we talk about fibrous joint, Bikram, you are absolutely right. Fibrous joints do not allow any movement and they are present in sutures in cranium. And when we talk about fibrous joints, then we have dense fibrous connective tissue which join two different bones. Alright, so we have dense fibrous connective tissue. Coming to synovial joint, so between the synovial joints we have a fluid filled with the synovial fluid, and that is why they allow easy movement, or they are more movable when we compare the other two joints. Alright, so we have synovial fluid here. Okay, so now coming to the examples which are quoted in the NCERT are cartilaginous joints are present between the vertebrae of our vertebral column. So we say that cartilaginous joints is present between the adjacent vertebrae of the vertebral column. Coming to fibrous joints, as one of you have answered that it is present in sutures in cranium. So dear student, it is present in the between the flat bones of the cranium in the form of sutures. Alright, and then coming to synovial joints, we have 6 categories which are the ball and socket joint. Then we have the pivot joint, we have the saddle joint, then we have the gliding joint, and lastly and then we have the saddle joint, we have the pivot joint, we have the gliding joint. Alright. So now let us go back to our question and we will read the options to figure out our answer. So our pivot joint is present between the atlas and axis. So atlas and axis are the first and the second vertebrae, and therefore option 1 cannot be the right answer. Moving to option 2, which states gliding joints. Alright, so gliding joint is present between the carpals, and we can see in our question we have been asked about carpals, so our right answer will be gliding joint. But let us quickly revise the other two. So our saddle joint is present between the carpal and metacarpal of thumb, and therefore option 3 cannot be the right answer. And fibrous joint, as already discussed, is present between the flat bone of our skull. Therefore, option 4 cannot be the right answer. All right. I can see someone has answered, ma'am, I want to know that ethmoid bone is a part of cranial bone or facial bone. So, dear student, ethmoid bone is a cranial bone and not a facial bone. Okay. Okay, again I see the next question that we have pertains to the chapter locomotion and movement. All right. So, it states choose the incorrect match with respect to the given items and their grouping categories with respect to humans. So, we can see there are four different concepts that they are putting together. So, the first one is about the ear ossicles, then we have the coxal bone, then again we have the joints, and then I can see we are talking about paired bones. So, let us quickly revise these concepts to find out our answer. So, what you see on your screen is basically the structure of ear. All right. And our only motive to see this picture is to figure out those bones which make our ear ossicles. So, basically we have 3 pairs of ear ossicles. Questions are often asked on their numbering. All right. So, we have 3 pairs of ear ossicles in our middle ear. You can see that in the diagram. In the middle ear we have stapes, incus and malleus. All right. So, these 3 bones are present in the middle ear and they help in passing of a sound from the outer ear to the inner ear for the sound production. And we need not go into the details of how sound is produced. We only need to remember that we have 3 pairs of bones, ear ossicles, and they are present in the middle ear, and they get their respective names from the type of shape that they represent. Then, so we have the malleus, which represents a hammer, and therefore we have that name. It looks like a hammer. Then we have the incus. So, incus looks like an anvil. So, an anvil is basically a iron-like structure on which you might have seen that people put their iron, when they are ironing a cloth, they put it on the anvil. All right. So, basically it's just like it is like a steel stand, I would say. So, it represents or resembles that shape, that is why it has been named incus. And then we have stapes. So, stapes are basically, when you have seen people horse riding, they try to fix their leg by using stirrups. Basically they are called stirrups. So, stirrups are used to fix the legs when someone is horse riding, and it kind of represents that shape, therefore it has been named as stapes. All right. So, this is the basic about the ear ossicles, and we need more information than this. Then the other concept that we saw in our question was about the coxal bone. So, basically in humans we have coxal bone in our, so basically pectoral girdle is constituted by this coxal bone. All right. So, the first thing that we need to remember is that, sorry, it is not the pectoral girdle, it is the pelvic girdle. All right. So, basically pelvic girdle is constituted by, I'm seeing someone is asking, ma'am, just want your advice that we have to do sense organs topic deducted from NEET syllabus for safe side. I would suggest that we should focus on the topics that has been prescribed in the syllabus, alright. That is enough for you to score good marks, alright. So, a pelvic girdle is constituted by the coxal bone, and it is also known as the hip bone. And this coxal bone is made up of by fusion of 3 different bones. So, coxal bone is basically made by the fusion of 3 different bones, and those 3 different bones are ilium, pubis and ischium, alright. And in the diagram which is taken from the NCERT itself, I can see that we have ilium, which seems to be the largest bone which is present in the coxal bone. Then we have the pubis, alright, and then we have the ischium. So, ischium is the bone which helps or which gives you support when you are sitting, okay. So, in all, what we need to remember in this, when we talk about coxal bone, is that it is made by the fusion of 3 bones, and it constitutes the pelvic girdle. If we further go in detail, we can see the structure of the pelvic girdle, alright. So, let us see the structures one by one quickly. So, the largest bone, as explained, was the ilium. So, this is the ilium, alright, and then we have the ischium, and then we have the ischium, and the other bone that we have is the pelvic pubis. The other bone that we have is pubis, alright. In question, they sometimes try to confuse you by stating the spelling of the ilium as ilium, which is the ilium from your digestive system, alright. So, it is important that when you do the question, you make sure to focus on the spelling which is given in the question, alright. Okay. I can see in the comment section someone has already written it incorrectly, and it's good that you corrected yourself. It should not be ILEUM, it should be ILIUM, alright. Now, if we see that the pubis is coming together to form the pubic symphysis. So, basically, 2 pubis are being joined together with the help of a joint. Here again we are talking about joints, and I mentioned that joint serve as the attachment point for bones. So, we can see that here 2 bones which are pubis are getting attached to form the pubic symphysis, and here we say that it is fibrocartilaginous joint. Alright, and our NCERT also states that 2 pelvic girdle meet together and form the pubic symphysis in the ventral side. So, we can see it is the ventral side, and when they are talking about 2 pelvic girdle, it means they are talking about the one half. So, here we have the one half and the other half, alright. So, this is all when we talk about the pelvic girdle. So, now we go back to our question. So, our first option states malleus incus and stapes, and they are ear ossicles, and therefore, it is absolutely correct and cannot be the right answer. Then moving on to second, we have ilium, ischium and pubis, which constitute the coxal bone of the pelvic girdle, which is again we discussed at length, is absolutely correct, and therefore it cannot be the right answer. And then I can see we have pivot joint, saddle joint and gliding joint, and we already discussed that they are categorized as the synovial joint and not fibrous joint, and therefore the answer that we are looking for is option third, because the given category has been stated incorrectly. All right. And lastly, I can see we have the names of the bones, and they are said to be paired bones. So I see nasal. So nasal is a paired facial bone. Then we have parietal and temporal. So basically your parietal bone is this part of your skull, whereas your temporal bone is close to somehow, I would say, this part of your head constitutes the temporal bone. So you can always remember that here you have two parietal bones. If I try to draw the skull, okay, so we have two parietal bones because we don't want half of our head, right? So we have two parietal bones, all right, and then we have two temporal bones. Just try to remember it that way. Since we have 2 ears, we need two temporal bones to keep it in its place, all right. That is how I try to remember it. Okay, so we have parietal and temporal, which are paired cranial bones. Okay, so this is absolutely correct and cannot be the right answer. All right, so we move on to our next question now. Okay, so the next question that we have is question number 140, and it states, which of the following is considered as primary lymphoid organ? Okay, so basically we now come to our chapter Human Health and Disease, which is one of the interesting chapters. Okay, so for dealing with this question, let us quickly revise the concept of lymphoid organs in our body. So basically, like for every purpose in our body, be it for breathing, be it for digestion of food, be it for chemical coordination, we have a defined system in our body. Similarly, for providing immunity to our body, we have a particular system which is known as the immune system. And the immune system, just like the other system, has its own components, and they are the cells, the organs, or we say the proteins. So when we say cells, so it basically means the cells which participate, be it the innate immunity or the active immunity, to provide protection. And when we talk about organs, then they are the primary and secondary lymphoid organs, and then we have the cells, or then we have the proteins, which are the antibodies which help in maintaining immunity in our body. Okay. So basically the organs that we are talking about here are primary lymphoid organs, and then we have the secondary lymphoid organs. All right. So the primary lymphoid organs are bone marrow and thymus, whereas we have various organs which are classified as secondary lymphoid organs. So first of all, let us try to understand that what is the basic difference between the primary and the secondary organ. So basically, primary organs are the site where the origin, maturation and to put it simply, training of these lymphocytes takes place. And secondary lymphoid organ is the site where the lymphocytes which originated here, which got trained here, comes into action. So basically we would say that secondary lymphoid organs are the site where effector cells are produced, or the lymphocytes that were generated in the primary lymphoid organs came into action, or they show proliferation. Okay. So our NCERT states that bone marrow is the lymphoid organ where all the lymphocytes, all the different types of lymphocytes are originated, which means that bone marrow can give rise to two different types of lymphocytes which exist in our body, which is the B lymphocyte and the T lymphocyte. And further, the maturation of B lymphocytes takes place in the bone marrow itself, whereas the maturation of T lymphocytes further takes place in the thymus. So we also say that thymus is the training school or the throne of immunity, all right? And also it is often asked that does bone marrow contribute in the maturation of thymus or not? So the answer is yes, that bone marrow contributes in the maturation of T lymphocytes or not. So the answer is yes, that for the maturation of T lymphocytes we need both bone marrow as well as thymus, all right? So basically what happens is our lymphocytes are being generated in these two structures, and then they migrate to the secondary lymphoid organs, and there they show their action. So you just need to remember it in a way that bone marrow and thymus are just like your medical school, medical college, where they are preparing you for dealing with the patients, all right? Whereas secondary lymphoid organ is the action site, which means that secondary lymphoid organ is the hospital where you will actually perform whatever you have learned in your medical school, all right? Now, talking in terms of immunology, what basically happens here is that in the bone marrow and thymus, maturation of lymphocytes, the respective lymphocytes takes place, and they develop particular receptors by which they will interact with the antigen, all right? So when they develop these receptors are specific for the antigen. So when they migrate to the secondary lymphoid organs, the pathogen which are present at these secondary lymphoid organs will bind to that particular B lymphocyte or T lymphocyte with which the antigen is showing complementarity. Basically, each antigen has a particular receptor to which it will bind, and here in the secondary lymphoid organs, the lymphocytes which are particular for a given antigen will come into action. And the different secondary lymphoid organs that we have are spleen, then we have tonsils, then we have the Peyer's patches in our small intestine, then we have the lymph nodes then we have the appendix, and the majority of our secondary lymphoid organ is formed by MALT, which is the mucosa associated lymphoid tissue, and in the NCERT it is stated that 50% of the lymphoid organ is constituted by MALT. All right. So I hope this concept is clear, that basically in B and T lymphocytes, in bone marrow and thymus, the lymphocytes are being originated, they are being matured, they are being trained to deal with the incoming pathogens, whereas secondary lymphoid organs are the site where they proliferate. These lymphocytes will proliferate and they will come into action to show or to perform the defense for the protection of the individuals. All right. So now we go back to our question. So it is stating we need to choose the primary lymphoid organs. So amongst all, it is obvious that bone marrow is the primary lymphoid organ. So our right answer will be option 1. So now we move on to our next question. So the next question that we have in our bucket is, you can see the diagram of the different lymphoid organs. We have the spleen, we have the thymus, which the NCERT writes that it is present near to the heart and beneath the breastbone. So the breastbone is the sternum that we are talking about. Then we have the pairs, patches in small intestine. We have the appendix, we have the lymph node, we have the tonsil and the bone marrow. All right. So these are the different types of lymphoid organs that are present in our body. Now moving on to the next question, which is about bacterial disease, that amongst the given option we need to choose the disease which is caused by bacteria. Now in the given chapter of human health and disease, we have various types of diseases which are being mentioned along with their pathogen. So let us quickly revise those. Okay. So it is often said that all pathogens are parasites, but all parasites are not pathogen, simply meaning that if an organism is present in your body, it doesn't mean that it will be pathogenic or harmful to you. For instance, we often say that E. coli is present in our intestine, so it is not harming us in any way. But there are also pathogens which can bring about an infection in our body, and those pathogens are characterized as bacteria, we have viruses. The very famous pandemic that we had recently was caused due to a virus. So you can imagine that a tiny creature can affect our life so badly. Then we have the fungi, then we have protozoans, and finally we have the helminths. All right. So the very famous bacterial disease that we often get to hear about is the typhoid. So typhoid is caused by a bacteria which is known as Streptococcus, typhi murium. All right. It is a negative gram bacteria, and typhoid is caused by fecal-oral route, and its basic and its symptoms include sustained high fever, loss of appetite, and in extreme cases there can be intestinal perforation and it can be lethal for the patient. So, we will quickly just revise the names. Okay. So, we have typhoid under bacterial diseases, then our NCERT mentions about pneumonia. Also an important point is that typhoid can be detected by Vidal test. Okay. Pneumonia is caused by two different types of bacteria, which is the Streptococcus pneumoniae, and then we have the Haemophilus influenzae. So, basically these two bacterial pathogens can cause pneumonia, and pneumonia can turn lethal because it infects our lungs. Basically what happens due to infection of pneumonia, our alveoli gets filled with fluid that will affect the respiration, or it will lead to breathing issues that can be lethal for the patient. So, and also the basic difference between common cold, which is caused by a virus, and pneumonia is that in pneumonia lungs are affected, whereas in common cold we do not see that there is infection in lungs. It is also a point where questions are often framed that whether lungs get impacted in common cold or not. So, the answer is no. Lungs will not get impacted in common cold. Basically in common cold we suffer from nasal congestion, that's all. And the other bacterial diseases that we have in our NCERT is diphtheria, diphtheria is caused by Corynebacterium diphtheriae. Then we have plague. Plague is caused by the virus named Yersinia pestis. These names are not very important because we have not seen any trend where questions are being asked on these names. We just need to remember, basically we need to focus on these two, typhoid and pneumonia, because NCERT has specified the name of the pathogen, right. Then the other disease that is caused by bacteria is the dysentery. It is important that we know that we also have amoebic dysentery and then we also have the bacterial dysentery, all right. So, amoebic dysentery is caused by Entamoeba histolytica, about which information is given in the NCERT, all right. Then the other disease that we have is tetanus, that is caused by a bacteria, and in one of the PYQs it was asked that whether cholera is a bacterial disease or not. So, again cholera is caused by a bacteria known as Vibrio cholerae, all right. So, basically these are some of the names of the bacterial disease that we get to read in our NCERT, and some of them which I have taken like tetanus and cholera has been given in the previous year's question. So, now let us quickly go back to our question to figure out the answer. So, the first option that we have is dysentery, all right. So, dysentery can be bacterial, but then I see it is given dengue. So, dengue is again caused by a virus where the mosquito Aedes acts as a vector. It is caused by a virus, but Aedes acts as its vector. Therefore, option 1 cannot be the right answer. Now, secondly, I can see we have diphtheria, but diphtheria again is a bacterial disease, but we also have along with it amoebiosis, and we all know that amoebiosis, as the name suggests, is caused, amoebiosis is caused by a protozoan which is Entamoeba histolytica. Basically, in amoebiosis, our large intestine gets affected, and therefore option 2 also is incorrect. So now finally we have third option, which states typhoid and plague, and as already discussed, typhoid and plague are bacterial diseases, and therefore our right answer will be option third. But let us see the last option as well, which states polio and tetanus. So polio is again a viral disease which is caused by the poliovirus, whereas tetanus is a bacterial disease, but since we have one odd option, therefore option 4 cannot be the right answer. So our right answer is option third. Alright, I can see someone has answered question, in pectoral girdle how many bones are there, 4 or 2. So basically in pectoral girdle we have 4 bones, and in pelvic girdle we have 2 bones. So in all the total number of girdle bones are 6. Okay, and the question that you asked, that each half of pectoral girdle consists of 2 bones. So if we in total how many bones? So just imagine that if each half, let's assume each half of pectoral girdle consists of 2 bones, each half is made up of 2 bones, then both halves will be obviously constitute 4 bones. Alright, so your answer will be 4. Okay, so this marks the end of the discussion. I hope you found the session fruitful. All the best for the upcoming NEET exam as the dates are out, and hope to see you again. Bye.